combination of the yellow sheet that you're picking up now in small groups, and we'll put answers up on the board and record like we did with roots and stems for getting more clear as a group. We'll talk about the respiration homework. That's due today. Hang on to it now if you'd like to discuss, and drop it in the basket at the end. Quiz on the 2 will be Wednesday. Ending our discussion here. We'll start with review also Wednesday. Last questions, getting clear. And then after that, I'm going to move into hormones, tropisms, environmental response of plants to things like temperature and light. And so now we've got this whole plant. We know the organs and organ systems. We know about how it exchanges with the environment in terms of gases for photosynthesis and respiration, in terms of absorption of water. And so now I want to look at some of the other conditions before the term is over, and how we use knowledge of the plant responses to manage our own strategies for taking care of these plants. And we're running out of time to do it. So quiz and a little new content Wednesday. Monday we'll continue with that. Next Wednesday, no class. Afternoon before Thanksgiving. Rest, review, just, enjoy or take a nap, something. And then when we come back after Thanksgiving, there's one more week of content. We'll continue on with those environmental responses and some review on the final Wednesday for the final exam, which is 3 weeks from today on the 8th. So right here, same time, and all of that. So coming up quick. Right off the bat, questions before we begin here? Yeah, well, as they show up, we'll talk about them. Yeah, that's it.
Question number 1, after the energy produced by the carbon cycle, if I was saying that it's a product,
Question 1 on the respiration homework. How much energy is produced? So that's asking about the quantity of one of the products. So let's talk about it. Carbon cycle, right? That's our second step in photosynthesis, right? AKA the light independent reaction. Comparing that, right? So this really goes along with the other two today, because it's asking you to look at both of these together. Respiration, okay, also known as, anybody?
Krebs cycle.
Krebs cycle. So in both of these cases, it was a person who identified the process, or was not the only one, but ended up getting credit for it. And here, it's talking more about what's involved. Don't need light for the second step, and here it's about this breaking down of carbons to get these acids that we can harvest the energy between them for some use. So use a chart to compare these, and we answered the first one already, reactants and products, and then how much energy is produced. So photosynthesis, how much or what kind of energy is produced, if any? Is it? Anybody else think that?
Zero?
It uses it. Uses it. Or a little bit. Over, say 2. CO2. That's definitely where we need. Absolutely. That's going to be one of the reactions here today.
CO2.
Go for
Or
it.
like NADPH?
Yeah, that energy from the first step, right? Which is in ATP and NADPH form. That's just, right? That's the energy that, Christopher, maybe that's what you're thinking of in the light reaction? That ATP production that starts the process? What are you thinking about?
That must have skipped a step forward.
In the electron transport? Yeah, definitely. So in that case, what will, just to finish this up, what comes out of the light independent reaction?
Glucose.
Right, so, right, that's the result, photosynthesis. So in this case, we've got stored energy here that's not immediately accessible. And in comparison, citric acid cycle, these are both the second step. What kind of energy comes out here? And
CO2.
in what sort of amount? 2 or 30? 36. That's the whole deal. The whole respiration process. So, right, it makes citric acid as it's breaking this thing down, hence the name. It takes a while to break down to glucose, the same way it takes a while to build one up. And over here, from the start, we see a little bit of that NAD plus turning into NADH energy, but otherwise, here is where we get a little ATP, right? A little energy comes out of this. And then in the final step, in electron transport, is where we get the majority of the energy. So here we might just say, is it 2 ATP or like a little energy? And oftentimes, when that little bit of energy is produced, sometimes it's obvious, like light reaction needs that result to make the next step, light independent reaction, happen. Sometimes it's just a side result, a convenient unintended consequence of the need to move into the next step by pushing things across the membrane, and then the way things either are broken apart or put back together can result in that energy released or that energy stored. And in this case, it's sort of like that. It's like, and of course, that little bit can get circled around to then, remember we in respiration at the beginning, right? It's not magical. It needs energy to start it just like any other chemical reaction. So sometimes you can generate that right here and keep that thing churning before you get to that next step with the big payout. Does that help? And then of course, we can fill these in too, and we'll be doing that in small groups. John, your question?
Yeah, it seems weird to put glucose as energy.
Yeah, it's not really. It
Okay.
more belongs in the next one up. Yeah.
And then my second one is more of answering these homework questions and really just looking at the tests. Are we considering ATP, NADPH reactants, products, or just leaving those as separate things that are
in some cases reactants, in some cases products. So unlike in photosynthesis, unlike Rubisco or PEP, these enzymes that are unchanged in the reaction, right? These are changed multiple times. Here was one, right, where an electron's added and it becomes NADH, right? Here, energy is added and becomes ATP from ATP. So it changes and then the energy is released and it goes back to D. So like here, for example, energy goes into the process as ATP. And if we looked at electron transport chain, or this could go here as that was one of the results there. So it could be both a reactant or a product. And remember that the connector piece between the two of them, photosynthesis and respiration here, is that in respiration, that ATP energy is the primary product, right? It's the result, this energy to do the work of growing. And it's the energy from sunlight or artificial light into photosynthesis that is like the mirror image opposite side of the equation. So that is one of the reactants in photosynthesis, right? Is the energy of the light. Without it, of course, the first step doesn't happen, right? So you need that in. More questions? Was it Akasha next?
I guess I'm stuck on the energy and products portion of this.
Okay.
So for the Calvin cycle for products, I have the D3C, and for the Krebs cycle for products, I have CO2 as a product. And then for energy for citric acid in the Krebs cycle, I have 2 ATP, but I'm still unsure of what the Calvin cycle, what energy is being produced by the Calvin cycle. So am I wrong in putting 2 ATP in energy for the Krebs cycle and CO2 as a product?
No, that's all right. And then so yeah, here, right, there's not really. This is the comparison, right? Is that in photosynthesis, it's an energy in process. It's absorbing that solar energy to build up a thing, which the first unit is this sugar called glucose, right? And again, you can stack those up and make starch and store it in a small space, right? And this one is an energy out process that takes this thing and finds the energy inside by ripping it back apart. Right? So that's the takeaway. It's not like just to make a chart. It's that they're different, right? Energy in and energy out as a, right?
I can see that in my head, but like I guess for the purpose of the chart, I was stuck on like, I need to have something here for energy or something.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
always just try to think about the point.
Yeah.
Right? It's trying to tell you something, and to the last part of the question, which we haven't addressed, is what are the limiting factors, then there's a quick cheat to answer that question. John's nodding. What is it?
Reactants or.
Yeah, stuff that goes in, right? You run out of one or more, then reaction slows or stops. Yeah, so whatever's in this column is also, right, a set of limiting factors. And, each thing, there's something to extract there. CO2, right? And this is how you build that story, I think, that creates your understanding is, okay, so this is the second step. That's where carbon dioxide comes into the equation. So that can remind you that the whole light reaction could have already taken place, right, without that carbon dioxide present. So when we say we need CO2 for photosynthesis, that's true, but it's not at every step, right? So we could break apart those waters, release oxygen, save some solar light energy, right? Make a little bit of ATP that starts this thing, but then we don't have CO2 in the next step. Now that's the limiting factor. Right? Whereas here, it's going to be a different answer. So, in each, I'm trying to get at, like, yes, very similar one direction to the other, but also the difference is significant because it's building up this thing that then you can use later for the purposes of growth in whatever capacity is required. And there's all these connections then, right? So need CO2 here, light reaction could have happened, all that stuff that I just mentioned already present. Where does that come from? How does the plant get this? How's it get CO2? Open some oven, right? Access the air that has this, right, 420 ppm carbon dioxide. Just low, but it's not nothing, right? And it's required, so that's how we do it. And that connects to what makes a stoma open or close, those guard cells, vacuoles, right? Turgidity, letting in water. So everything is informing the next thing. And if you can look at one and make the connections, then it puts more together. Yeah, that's,
This is about the citric cycle.
we're on number one still?
Yes. Oh, yeah, for the energy produced on the citric cycle, I think I read in this handout you gave us, that it releases a high electron, a high, can't think of the word. Like a high charge electron.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from? Is it like just a buildup of the energy or just?
Yeah, I mean, so, right, that's gonna be what ends up as the ATP. Those high energy electrons are your energy source. That's what, let me get back to the circle. Here. Right, and again, I don't want people to get lost here, but for this kind of question, it's useful. So this is that high energy electron that turns ATP, this is low energy, into ATP, which now holds that energy, that it can be transported in the phloem, right, to go grow at a node that's far away, or to go keep giving energy to making new roots, whatever needs to be done. So that's, and how it happens, right, this whole complicated set of reactions that you don't need to be able to identify, but the base concept here is the breaking down of the glucose into its component parts where the energy was stored and now it's becoming available. So as that goes from the C6 glucose to fewer carbons in a different thing, right, the citric acid, some energy is getting released. And it's putting it in this form that is ready then to be shoved across the membrane of the mitochondria to do the next step, which is going to give you much more energy. And again, all these things, NADH, this one too, right? They're all just moving around those high energy electrons, and that's how the energy is transferred or stored. So I think with that, let's work on the plant energy yellow sheet in some small groups, and I'll break them up here. And then, as we answer all of them as a group, I think there's some overlap with the homework, so we can put it all together. And for the rest that's still unclear, then we'll answer it as a group. So there's 8 questions here, and I'm going to make 8 tables. So 3, 1, 3 there, 3 there, 3 there, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And we got D with Julian and Fernando in the back, and Moss, and then that table, that table.
Got one more question over.
We got, Colleen also. All right, she can join the front table. And the question is useful. 1, 2, 3 for Stella at the table, 4 in the back, 5 for Julian and Dee, Fernando. send a scribe to get your reduced nuggets of
Light and water is easy to make. So water and sunlight is good.
Yeah, the respiration, oh, did you say before? Transpiration is
So
Less lead causes less
There are levels of existence we are prepared to accept. This was a secret that was from one of the makers, where they're like,
The reason why
making you feel, the robots are making you
lose
feel
their color when they lack nitrogen,
they're like, it was talk
Not yet. 3 carbons. G3P is like the name of the 3 carbon compounds together. So that's like the intermediate temporary thing. And then another one of those. The other, that's the carbon is. Or it's also atomic numbers.
They haven't already CO2 3 times to make CO2,
Carbon dioxide.
chloroplasts are always for the big green so it's happening all the time.
Okay, so that's, it does say access the source of electricity produced in photosynthesis? That's kind of where it gets the energy. So basically, glucose and energy is that more or less the same?
Photosynthesis makes a sandwich,
Yeah.
respiration makes a sandwich.
That's what I thought. And then, what's happening all the time?
So I would just say.
Not a- One is respiration.
Okay, it's clicking.
Respiration
It's
stops.
clicking. Mine's just like that. Okay.
For us too. Respiration gives the energy to make the heartbeat, to make the lungs.
It's clicking now. It's good. It's hard to separate. No, because that's just photosynthesis. Yeah, you got it. You nailed it. I was like, I'm not worried about it. It's gonna be fine. We're just getting the concept of breathing. Good, we're good. Great. It's over here.
The plant eats the glucose.
Oh my god.
Respiration, yeah. Photosynthesis makes CO2. The respiration.
Years, that water.
It's either way. It's easier to go.
thing though. Yeah, number 5. Feel free to put up what you got. An important point that you'll all want to hear based on some feedback while I was answering questions. And I was also thinking of this myself, but let's have the quiz next Monday. That way we can get the respiration homework back, address anything outstanding from that on Wednesday. I'll still start the new content, but the quiz next Monday, and I'll write that up here when I get some space, will be only photosynthesis and respiration, and then the new content, hormones, plant response to the environment, etc., however far we get with that, will all show up just on the final exam. Answer number 1. Where chloroplasm green, where is chlorophyll found? What is its function? Why do deciduous leaves change colors in autumn? Right? This is like a typical Kristen and good question, right? There's like all these things loaded in there that are connected, and you want to make sure to answer each one. And generally, I'm not grabbing random things, right? They're pieces of the same puzzle at least. So. Front group has answered chloroplasts are green because they reflect green light and absorb the other red ones. Chlorophyll is found inside the hydrophobic membrane of the chloroplast. Yeah, for here, distinct chloroplast. That's where the tab is chlorophyll, chloroplast, green. Chlorophyll absorbs light energy. Leaves change color because chlorophyll is an unstable pigment. It breaks down while carotenoids and cyanin pigments remain. So that's true. That last part is something we didn't spend much time explaining about how autumn leaf fall happens. When we get to hormones, we're going to talk about ethylene and abscisic acid, 2 plant hormones that work together in deciduous leaf drop in the fall, and so we'll have a little bit better understanding of that there. But this is true. Chlorophyll's more volatile, and the big picture point is that as light goes away in the fall, right, we're losing light every day, if you've noticed, the plant is producing less and less chlorophyll in those leaves because there's less and less need. Now the angle of the light's lower, right, the quantity is less, fewer hours of daylight to absorb, and so no point in expending that energy to make a thing to absorb something that's not there, right? So we've seen a little bit of chlorophyll, and as there's less chlorophyll, what we see behind them is the other things. Then we see the reflected orange of the carotenoids beneath, or the reflected, blues or reds of an anthocyanin underneath. And so the different leaf colors that we see out there in autumn are indicative of like the relative quantities of those other pigments that that individual tree or tree species has. And again, we'll see more detail on the hormone response, how it signals to seal off that leaf from the rest of the tree and let it drop too. So it's all about resource conservation in this case. That you don't make structures that aren't going to be used, and the tree knows in a way that coming soon, because of the reduction in light, that these leaves are gonna be dropping away, so putting extra resource in there doesn't pay off. Speaking of this, in number 2, which pigments are involved in photosynthesis? What other pigments are found in plants? Chlorophyll, A and B, remember I showed they work a little bit differently, but both chlorophylls, right, definitely number 1, absorbing the most energy, carotenoids, right, it's a big drop to number 2, and then after that it's even less, xanthophylls appear yellow, and the cyanins appear red and blue, not photosynthetic, right, stored elsewhere, that's right there, number 2. And 3, which wavelengths and colors of light have the most energy? Which colors are involved in photosynthesis? Red and blue have the most energy while also being the colors primarily involved in photosynthesis. Mostly right. So it's only the blue violet side that has the highest energy among light. These are absolutely the 2 that are most involved in photosynthesis. Back here. As a reminder, and I know I'm talking in two plant systems at once, but they're very connected here. So again, chlorophyll absorbs most energy in blue violet and in orange red, that's correct. But just in terms of pure energy of the light, right, there's more here than there is here. It's all moving this direction. So while the energy that gets used by plants comes from both spots, overall, right, ultraviolet light is more harmful to you than infrared light because it's higher energy. That's 3. And number 4, what products are the results of one turn of the Kelvin cycle? We got, a little discussion back there about turns and what that means and stuff. And what we came up with was at the end, what the Kelvin cycle is doing is taking carbon dioxide and breaking it so you can get that carbon and then start building that into glucose. And for one turn of the thing, you get 1 carbon out. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you that particular detail again, but you definitely should know that the light-independent reaction takes carbon. It's initiated by the little bit of energy from the light reaction, takes carbon from carbon dioxide in the presence of an enzyme, right? Rubisco for C3 plants or PEP for C4 or CAM plants, and starts putting these carbons together to build the glucose. But the first step, right, is carrying them out of the carbon dioxide that they're currently bonded into through open stomata into the plant to bring that and store it together.
So it's chaining them onto the end of the RUP.
It's chaining them onto.
RUP.
No, the RUBP is Rubisco. That's the enzyme that just lowers the activation threshold, how much energy is required to start the process, into a range that it can happen when it's not too hot, and then that gets recycled and shows up again.
But then if a full turn is taking 1 carbon molecule, carbon atom, it's shoving it somewhere because it's an intermediary.
Yep.
So where is it attaching it
To the previous carbons from the turns before.
Okay, and then it's the first one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to start somewhere, right? But it's because these are happening all the time, right? Or as frequently as possible, because this is the light independent step.
So I thought RUBP is different than Rubisco.
This is it's the compound as it's the combination of the enzyme and the carbons on it, and then that goes, once the, you know, two of them are together, two carbons, then that's extracted out of it, ends up as the enzyme again, not the compound, and then,
Okay.
yeah, so it's, yeah, it's a lot of like, you know, this and this and this and this, it's all a small form change, but in this case, it's about getting the energy onto or off the thing, and here it's about getting the carbon onto the thing. So I came over here, this, so we can see these. Number 5 was a harder question. What are these acronyms and how are they different from these other acronyms? They're very similar. What's the role of these things? Overall, what I want you guys to think about, know when you see these things, whether it's NAD, and NADH, or NADPH, or ADP to ATP, is these are electron carriers. And back to the light reaction, when we said light energy excites electrons, absorbed into the chlorophyll. Electrons are the energy in the process. So these are the things that carry the energy around, either to make the next step happen, or eventually in respiration to have this packet of energy that can be used somewhere else to grow. And what's the role of these molecules in photosynthesis and respiration? Well, this first shows up to go from the light reaction, and this was the answer to, I think, the first written question in the photosynthesis homework, to the light independent reaction requires that little bit of ATP to make it happen. And then mostly we see ATP out, you know, and we said like, hey, it's about a third of 36 total of those in respiration. So again, this is what I was in answer to Akash's question earlier, right? This is an energy in process in photosynthesis and an energy out process in respiration. Number 6, what advantages do cells in plants get out of the process of respiration? Why is this happening all the time? Respiration is required in energy production. Is that right? Required? Yeah. By breaking down glucose. It's essential for plant growth. The plant's in a constant state of energy consumption to grow, allowing the survival of the species. That's right. It's just base level metabolism is always happening, right? Just like we're always breathing, our hearts are always pumping, right? And our lungs are doing their jobs. Plants have base level metabolic function that has to happen to stay alive, and the energy to do that, right, comes from respiration. And like we mentioned last week, it's dependent on temperature, how quickly it happens. So those base level functions are eating up more energy faster when temperature is high, and less energy more slowly when temperature is low. And so because the plant is at the mercy of temperature, then it's important to either manage that if you can, or understand the effect at least, to see what the demand is going to be like for the things that are required in respiration, which are food source and some gas from the atmosphere, oxygen, yes. And carbon dioxide goes into photosynthesis, comes out of respiration. 7, what are visco and PEP? What's their role in photosynthesis? Carbon-fixing enzymes in C3 and C4 plants, used in the light independent reactions of the Calvin cycle, we were just talking about. PEP is in C4 and CAM, or visco is in C3. Yeah, these are just the enzymes that are taking those carbons we got from carbon dioxide, sticking them together so that we can get the energy out of those bonds later. So that's high energy material. That's going to mean we can grow and do work later by harvesting. Finally, water, sunlight, CO2 are all involved in photosynthesis. What happens to the reactants at the end of the process? So this is kind of getting at your question, I think. We're kind of like, what's the whole deal and what happens where? take a break now until 2, 5, 7 minutes. Good chance to take a shot on this. If you want to take that home, fill in. You can turn it in Wednesday if you like, or record now, turn it in today, and then I'll continue on with more questions and stuff after the break. Would you like other like folders, stuff like this? You did? When you got the laptop, so it's not now. Sometimes the high school stuff, it's like so bound up with some emotional, or what the situation was. And take some revision before you really want to.
Like cyan, like a blue.
I can't, right, you did that, copy it.
The blue is here, it comes from.
Yeah, just take a photo. Yeah, you can just put mine back over here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't know the way it's written, so if you just remember that ATP are the energy carriers. That's it. So the point is, right, so that ATP comes out of respiration, that's the energy, that's the force, yeah. It's, yeah, so that's how, the extra P is where the energy is.
So this word is you're highlighting that. Oh, but this is the photosynthesis. Yes, you're like that's the power right there. So this
So you mentioned both. So yeah, this is, as they concentrate down here, this is the energy that comes out. So at every juncture where we say some ATP is produced, that's either energy that, like in a light reaction, that energy makes the next step, like in the reaction happen. Starts and ends.
right? So like
Here, you don't know what it's going to do yet. Respiration is available for making other reactions growing.
How cycles the light interaction?
Question, because I know the question goes,
Don't need so much detail there besides energy carrier.
It's energy carrier and big sugar.
And so like
Because I think that's
that's what trees basically. And products are also glucose. Oh, wait, okay, yeah. Okay.
you learn it all, but then this one's really, you can't learn it all. And that's just the legal jargon, I bet.
Absolutely.
The real,
Correct it all.
Base
And then
level
tell me
energy
how
carrier.
later on.
Comes out of respiration. Energy goes into photosynthesis.
it's almost every step you do. Which is.
How do you find it?
Yeah, usually
No,
a little bit of it is
by
used to make another thing happen.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, how about you have hands-on,
Big thing on respiration.
physically seeing, like, I like blocks that.
Large quantity that
That
usually
I- But it's just like a
Just
concept.
remember, moving things around takes energy, so you gotta be moving more energy than it takes to move it.
Or just kind of trying to like scale it up.
It might be easier if you like.
Yeah.
And this goes here.
Here,
Like if,
it's like just seeing it on paper, I'm like, these
just
are.
to move one semi worth
I
of
kind of like, I have
whatever
a
the
small
shipping
grasp, it's
container,
not like I'm like, I get it.
you gotta have more value in there than the gas money to do it.
This light still goes on outside of here, so.
Yeah.
I think like,
Yeah, whatever.
probably
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's puzzling.
Well, we still have some questions.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. We're gonna get through the homework, rest of the homework.
All right, I got a question.
It's kind of like.
Let me finish erasing and pulling the board down.
No. So you'll just know when.
But just know what's going on, and know about what's happening.
It's like my friend.
As soon as I start writing my ears, I'm like,
It's like getting in the field.
All right, so remember Quiz Now Monday, we first did that. And I'm hearing the anxiety, the concern, just the challenge with this material. And on the one hand, yeah, it's the more challenging part because there's this chemistry aspect that can't be avoided. At the same time, I've provided more information than, I've asked about more things here than will be in the final, right, or be on the quiz, because I'm hoping that the context will allow you to make connections. But if it doesn't, then let it go, right? And try to keep it to the nugget for each thing. Just asking a question, answering a question, oh, number 7 on the yellow sheet, like, what are these things? Visco and PEP. Just with each thing, try to keep it to the essential, right? Those guys are the things that are grabbing, right? They're bonding the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're getting it into the spot where it can be used in photosynthesis to build up this glucose out of carbons, right? So that's enough. Rubisco gets carbon. And then there's this connected thing where when it doesn't, because there's not enough carbon dioxide, then photorespiration happens. Right? It's oxygen, we know. That's not good because we don't get glucose out and it takes energy to do. But for each thing, just really try to keep it there. And so I'm going to answer questions, and then Marina asked that I kind of map the whole thing out from photosynthesis through respiration as like the story that then we can look at in the form that's appropriate without maybe as much extraneous stuff. So, Andrew, pursue your question.
So questions about NADPH and NADH.
Yeah.
They're different, but they're both intermediate, like high energy storage molecules. The first in photosynthesis, I think, the second in respiration, but they're kind of used interchangeably, like in question 5 here.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was confusing, like, we need to know that they're different.
No. You need to know in question 5, or for anything, is just that these are your energy carriers, right? And so their role is, go back. So you can say stored ATP, right? That's the energy out. Or if it happened to be stored NADPH, same thing. But most of the time, they're just moving that energized electron from one spot to the other to make something happen. Either push the next step to go, or to start building up enough of these things to pack it into a unit that's transportable. So again, that's like the distilled version for those are energy carriers. And there is, with whether it has the H on there yet or not, is just about the how many bonding sites there are. But when you add, in all these cases, the PI that's on some of that is phosphate bonds. They're high energy, and that's where when you add one in to get
Was the same functions?
Same function.
Okay, good.
Yeah. At least, obviously, like, there's a nitrogen in one and stuff, but in terms of overall function, let's say, they're moving energy, and sometimes we need that energy in another location, and there has to be some form to put it in for all organisms to turn that solar energy into something usable. And that's why chlorophyll is fantastic. It absorbs that, and then it can start to tack it onto these things from there. If we didn't have a pigment that was capable of absorbing the solar energy, then there would just be all this energy bombarding us, right, from the sun that we couldn't turn into anything. So it's that capacity to like, put it on something that makes it usable.
And so is NADPH just more useful in general, or do they just have their own functions for like moving things?
Just different functions.
Okay.
Yeah, different spots. Sometimes it's advantageous to have one and not the other, or hydrogen's not present, and then you can't take this one. So,
Got it, okay.
yeah. Christopher?
You mentioned, what is the equation for photosynthesis? What is the equation for respiration? Are you just speaking about, like, in a broad sense, like you're summarizing what happens? Or are you looking actually for the designations of the molecules plus,
I'm looking for the top one here. Don't need to know the number of molecules, but carbon dioxide and water and light makes glucose and oxygen. When I say the equation, that's what it is. What's in, what's out. And the same thing for respiration. If I ask that same question, then I'm looking for this from the first slide, right? And again, you don't need to tell me that it's the chemical equation's balanced, but you do need to know that glucose and oxygen combine to produce definitely no energy, right? And then there are these water and carbon dioxide released. What's nice is if you know one, turn it around, and you know the other, right? As long as you can keep track of, here this is chemical energy, and then when you flip it into photosynthesis, it's solar energy, that's the light. Again, flip it, glucose and oxygen, go the other way, gives you carbon dioxide and water and energy, right? Which here was called light, as it is. But in the case of respiration, now it's this chemical packet of energy. Does that answer it?
yeah, I just wanted to know how much to beat up my brain.
That much. That
As
much.
long as you
Five,
get
each one has 5 things.
The word equation is what you're
The
looking
word
for.
equation, yeah. What, just literally tell me, if you can, you can do CO2 plus H2O, and I'll know that you know it then. I don't care, about 6 of these and 6 of these, but what goes in, what comes out?
Could you go back to that slide?
To the respiration one?
Yeah.
It is. That's the first slide. Next question. All right, so you guys want this? No. No other questions? Homework? Awesome.
I think I'm getting tripped up on explaining like the limiting factors for these processes. Like I get that sometimes like things get missed in the chain, but I don't really know how to explain like why or like how to put that down.
Yeah. Good question. You don't necessarily have to explain why. I gave a hack earlier for the limiting factors. Did you catch what it was?
I don't think so.
It's that limiting factors. That's right. For an equation, chemical equation anyway, equals the reactants. So in the case of this, right, what goes in, glucose and oxygen are reactants.
So just not enough of whatever reactant.
Yeah,
is the limiting
right.
factor.
If there's no oxygen for whatever reason, then this can't happen, and we'll get that fermentation, right, that anaerobic respiration with less energy. If they're out of glucose, then we're getting nothing. Okay? So all that means is that when you run out of something that's needed, then the thing stops. Okay? Or it changes to anaerobic. In this case, means way less energy. On the flip side, photosynthesis, someday I'll figure out if this flip thing or something. Carbon dioxide, water, light, in those three are your simultaneously your reactants and your limiting factors. So if there's no light, it's not starting. So that's a limitation. If there's no carbon dioxide, we spent a bunch of time talking about, right, the stomata got to be open, there's not much in the atmosphere, you got to get it in, and how CAM plants and CO4 plants have strategized to do that under hot, dry circumstances, conditions, where otherwise plants would be opening stomata to get it in, and then drying out in the process. And water. It's just like, right, the necessity in each case of having all the things required. Right? So when we say plants need water and sunlight and soil to live, right, part of what we're talking about at the first grade level is enough water to do photosynthesis, right? Enough light to do photosynthesis. And if you have sunlight but not a lot, you're going to do less. Right? If you have some water but not a lot, you're going to do less. If you're out entirely, then it's going to stop. So it's going down in rate until it's fully limited by the absence of something altogether. Does that help? Yeah? All right. Okay, next, yeah, Jack.
Could you explain the relationship between respiration rate and photosynthesis of growing plant?
Yeah. So you're getting at the homework question number 4, yeah?
Yep.
Take a look. Okay. So, respiration rate and temperature, photosynthesis and temperature. And you're just asking about the,
You could go over both, it's easy.
do both of them? Yeah, let's do both of them. So, first off, I was here. Respiration rate and temperature. Temperature up, respiration rate up, largely, until pretty high temperature, peaks, right, in the 120s. So, up. And then, when it gets that hot, the plant's in danger of denaturing proteins breaking down. So respiration slowing down out of the necessity of actual collapsing the plant's metabolism.
So basically, the higher heat, the higher respiration, which is going to give you more energy and require
Need more? Well, it's gonna make more
It's
energy.
going to make more energy,
right?
but it needs the supplies to be able to make it.
Exactly. So it's gonna have higher demand for all those
Yeah,
things
that's what I'm
up
trying to
until
get to.
this point, yeah.
Is that the main point here?
That's the main point.
Okay, I
Yeah.
want to make sure.
As
it's
temperature
hard for
goes
me to-
up and respiration rate goes up, the reactants, which are also the limiting factors in respiration, the need for those goes up. Right? Oxygen is probably going to be enough, right? It's just in the air in large amount. But glucose might be limited. And then we get to the second part where if we're doing more respiration than photosynthesis, right, then we're using up the energy faster than we can make it. And then not getting any bigger. Say what?
Then you die.
Yeah, well, eventually, for a while you suffer. So that's respiration rate up, temperature up. Remember, a lot of that's lost is heat. About 40% is stored energy. And photosynthesis, I gave you a similar look. rate goes up, as temperature goes up, there's some optimal point, and then past that, rate of photosynthesis slows until some maximum point where we can't photosynthesize anymore. And usually, that's lowest for seed-free plants because then they would have to have a lot of open to get enough CO2 to keep going, but at that high temp, then they're losing a ton of water at the same time. So oftentimes C4 CAM plants, this number is, several degrees higher than it would be for seed-free plants, but the overall trajectory is still temp up, photosynthesis up, right? Rate of photosynthesis, how fast food is being made, but not as high as respiration, right? This is again generalized around 80, maybe 85, and the generalized respiration I just showed you was like 120, right? So there's a big gap there where there's the chance to have an issue that I showed you though. So that part I just mentioned is all in this zone. Beyond the net photosynthesis, where it's just respiration using up energy here without making more, because now the plant's capacity to do that is shut down at these high temps over here. So it's just using energy. And eventually, if it uses up all its energy, then it's going to be consuming itself, right? Instead of making more leaves, it's going to be using the energy in those leaves just to respire, to stay alive. So that's the danger in this zone, right? Which over here would be up there. This green zone is more photosynthesis than respiration. That's the sweet spot for efficient plant growth, right? You're packing on the food, and at the same time, you're using it to grow, but you haven't used it all up yet. It's like, for us, if we're doing some high energy activity, you're gonna, I don't know, run a marathon, you're gonna go on a really long hike, or something like that, without your energy gels and all that, like when you use up more calories than you have, you're gonna bonk out, right? Like your body won't have energy to use, and you're gonna cramp up and be in pain. So it's the same thing for plant, it's just without that available glucose to rip apart to make stuff, and you need more of it than respiration to use, otherwise you're breaking yourself down. Does that help?
So pretty much the point in between where photosynthesis and respiration like kind of cross paths, you want to be in between this area.
Like up here?
Yeah, you want to be below.
Yeah, you want to be, yeah,
Right
here.
here. I was looking at this one.
Oh, okay.
You want to be somewhere here, this area.
Yep, that's right. From above the green, inside the red. Yeah, which here is that. Yeah, so you want to be making more food than you can use, right?
So like when you're growing things, you really just want to be like you want to optimize photosynthesis.
Absolutely.
Respiration.
Yes.
Over respiration.
And there's a relationship, right?
Yeah.
So if you optimize photosynthesis at 80 degrees,
Yeah.
then respiration is going to be what it is at that rate. You can't get around it. That's just how much the rate is. Yeah. And if you say you drop the nighttime temperature in whatever that greenhouse is to 65, then you're going to slow photosynthesis, and you're also going to slow respiration, so the growth rate might be consistent still. Right? Not as big, but still more than the respiration. The danger gets to be when it's too hot for the most part. Because when it's too cold, right, there's not much photosynthesis, but there's also not much respiration.
Yeah, exactly.
So you
That's
just
what-
showed how.
That's how you hold plants. and stuff.
That's how you hold plants, is you make them cold, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's how you hold harvested produce that's no longer connected to the plant, but it's still respiring, is you make it cold and generally humid, right? So that it doesn't respire. Because in respiring, we know that one of the products of respiration is water, right? Water released. So for every carrot in the cooler that respires and releases water, that's a more wrinkly, right,
Yeah.
not as delicious carrot later. And so we reduce the respiration rate by reducing the temperature.
Gotcha.
And the flip side is high temp, right? Respiration rate's happening. In photosynthesis, we can't force it beyond that level, so it's all lost now. Go ahead.
I know you kind of went over it earlier, but could you talk about the Krebs cycle specifically, like what's going on there?
Yes.
Actually happens to function of the cycle.
The Krebs cycle is in respiration. Also called citric acid cycle. The primary product is carbon dioxide, right? And a little bit of energy is produced. That goes into the next part that gets you a lot of energy. But so here, there's a corollary with the Kelvin cycle in photosynthesis, hence the homework question number 1, comparing those two, where in that one, right, CO2 is grabbed by Rubisco or PEP enzyme and then broken into individual carbons. Here, it's the opposite, right? We have the glucose and we've started to break it into the carbons, and as a result, some of that carbon dioxide is released here. So this is like a middle step where we're further breaking apart glucose, makes a small amount of energy, and it makes the carbon dioxide that's released in respiration. So that's what you need there. So I think it helps to go back and see step 1, right, which needed energy to start. It starts breaking down carbon, and it makes a little bit of energy too. They're pretty similar in that way. Breakdown steps, mitochondria, and then finally that big harvest of energy across the mitochondrial membrane. So I think this gets to, let's see, maybe, is there another question? Otherwise, time for the timeline, the great timeline of these events. So, start. So first off, I'll say, what's up?
Quick question, but, so how does like day and night temperature affect photosynthesis? So if you have like a hot day and a cool night, would like cool nights slow down the Kelvin cycle? Or how does that work?
Good question. What do you think? So let's just get the setup. So the question was, how does daytime, nighttime temperature difference affect photosynthesis? We just looked at, one thing we can say for sure, obviously, right, is lower temp, less photosynthesis, right, slower rate, for sure. Specifically, hot day, cool night, you've asked about, and what changes there? What does it affect?
So it's the Kelvin cycle, that's the light and the vent reaction, water loss and water.
And water loss,
Yeah.
right? So less water loss, that lower temperature, that's good. And then it depends then, C3 or not C3 plant, it's going to be different. But we're almost there anyway. So you're saying it's going to affect the light independence reaction. Well, I mean, certainly it's going to affect the light reaction, right? Because it's nighttime, and that part's not gonna happen more. But in terms of the Kelvin cycle, it's gonna slow it down. And it's gonna slow it down by both the actual overnight low temperature and how quickly the drop is, you know? So at every moment, the plant is doing its life processes according to the conditions. So when it's a summer desert day and it's 8 p.m. and it's still 90 degrees, right? It's working fast, a lot of photosynthesis. And then it's also dropping fast, so that rate's gonna drop off quickly. that drop is much slower. It could be gradual, and then there's still a lot of light independent reaction that can be making glucose over that time, whereas with a quick drop, it's just gonna bottom out fast and then work at whatever base level it can until it runs out of carbon dioxide, you know, before morning comes. And so that, it depends on the total base temperature, how low it gets, how quickly it gets there, and then the other factors like, is there a breeze or not? What's the relative humidity level?
Sure.
Does that,
Yeah, no,
it's
yeah,
not an
that's-
exact answer, but.
Yeah, but it's just kind of wondering how that works.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's,
That's like negative and positives.
exactly. So, yeah, it gets into how you manipulate that for different, reasons too.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of talking about it in my head. I was like,
You know,
that's
and if you're in a greenhouse situation where you can maintain, you can be at the optimal temp all the time, right, potentially.
Exactly.
And so then, you're only limited by how much light reaction products you can get before you run out of light.
Exactly.
And then you can use those up
Yeah.
at an efficient rate until the next one.
Only manipulate.
Yeah.
It's like whatever you want to do.
So, again, we're boiling it down to the essentials, keeping in mind, like Mr. asked, what's the equation, right, for each one of these? You should know that. And again, if you know one, turn it around, change the energy form from sunlight to ATP, and you know the other. So, know one, and then know the other. And then build the story from there, adding in things like where it happens, right, and the outside factors that might affect it, or where the things come from that go into the equation. I'm likely to try to make sure you know that. And so, in the case of photosynthesis, let's start over here. With photosynthesis, the general deal is some things go in, right? Light, water, and then one other thing, carbon dioxide. Right, those are in. And then out comes glucose and oxygen. Right, so let's get there. So we've got light, absorbed, and you can also check that the things that you knew, glucose needs a circle, show up somewhere in the story. So now we double checked. All the things we said went in, showed up, right, they're accounted for. All the things we said came out, also were accounted for. And this important, right, intermediate point of, from one step to the other, you need a little bit of energy to keep it going. I think that's enough. Is that along the lines of what you're thinking so far? Yeah. So, now we got this glucose. And again, the options for this are either used now or stored. And if it's stored, it could be at the site of synthesis, right, where it's being made, or probably moved somewhere else. And if it's used now, same thing. It could be used for energy, right? And that leaf, right at that site, in the chloroplast, in the mesophyll, maybe the palisade mesophyll, where there's more chloroplast, right? Or it could be moved for other use, immediate use. And that use is respiration. And so, in each one of these, again, that boil it down, very simple photosynthesis, making food, respiration, taking food, and making energy, right? So respiration, similarly, I'll go different colors. The things that go in, the glucose from photosynthesis, glucose in, and the oxygen, maybe from photosynthesis, probably just from the atmosphere, go in. What comes out is carbon dioxide and water and energy. Again, energy source here, energy source here. Same other guys, right, which have all the C and H and O's that are also in glucose. And remember, glucose is a fire, burning that stuff up to use it. So you want to fuel that fire with oxygen. Otherwise, if you make your fire, you cut off the oxygen, you don't burn as well. And that's what you get, anaerobic respiration, right, which gives you way less energy, way less flame, and less result. So that's the overall thing. And let's see if we can see where things go, see how we get this in the same way. So to get to that energy at the end, here there's 3 steps. Right, we got glycolysis, and we're breaking down glucose. So that's glucose goes in right there. Where's the oxygen going? Is it right there in the first step? Still is correct, it's not. It's show up till later. Second step? That's it. Electron transport, right? That's where carbon dioxide comes out, and then in this final step, this big deal, right, we put in oxygen so that we can power the process more quickly, and that nets us a bunch of energy. In that same process, water is released. Because this hydrogen's in the glucose, and oxygen's in the glucose, and as they're torn apart, the carbons go here, and the rest ends up as water. So that's quick and the dirty on these two processes. Right? And of course, there's that relationship to temperature governing what happens, both outside the optimal range, cold or hot. And remember, respiration tolerates higher temperatures than photosynthesis, but at a cost of no food made, only this step happening, so thus running out of food in that case. Good.
Is oxygen not released in the respiration process? Or am I missing it?
Sorry, where?
In the entire respiration process?
No, oxygen goes in. Oxygen in, that's what fuels the fire. Carbon dioxide out, water out.
And the oxygen then comes from the breakdown of the CO2 that was released in the cell.
Say what?
The oxygen goes into the electron transport from the CO2 that was, and that was broken down, that's where the oxygen came from?
Oxygen came from the atmosphere.
Okay.
And then there's also oxygens in the glucose, and then as those are broken down, they end up as water. But this oxygen from the atmosphere, good point, right? It doesn't appear until the third step, right? So you can do these two. You can start breaking the glucose down without it, but if you don't have it, then that big payoff doesn't happen, and you get the anaerobic respiration, which results in a smaller quantity of energy, right? And then you get lactic acid, or you get an alcohol.
Based on that, directly from the homework, under what conditions would that anaerobic process be advantageous?
Yeah.
I haven't gotten, I know it's much less efficient, but what kind of conditions would it be in?
Waterlogged.
Waterlogged, absolutely. What else?
I have another question.
Too cold?
Okay, well, let's answer this one first. So this is question number 3 on the homework. Under what conditions will less efficient process be advantageous?
I'm trying to make moonshine.
What's that?
I'm trying to make
You're trying to make moonshine? Yeah, but I mean, in seriousness, think about, so waterlogged soil, absolutely. But what are the conditions in those places where things naturally ferment, right? Or where lactic acid fermentation is happening? Not necessarily. There definitely is low oxygen, right? So that could be in water, right? That could be, oftentimes it's buried and also wet, like in the soil and wet. How else do people answer that question? Cold, absolutely. Slow it down. Water. What's that? In water, yeah, that's a good answer, a correct answer. If you think about, say, in beer or wine making, something where yeast, again, those are fungus that are making, right, alcohols in anaerobic respiration. They're put into a tank full of liquid that's sealed, right? And so quickly, there's no more oxygen available, and if they couldn't anaerobically respire, then they would just die. Instead, they take the available sugars in that liquid, turn it into a small amount of lactic acid or alcohol, hopefully it's ethanol, and then when you open up that vat or that cask or whatever it is, then it's been transformed. And you need different yeasts if it's going to be an open vat. Another, yeah.
I guess that's just,
that oxygen is available to the plant roots that are in water. Right? It still exists as the bonded hydrogen and oxygen water molecule. And so because those two, the way that they bond, it's they do a better job of breaking something else apart than something else joining them. And so there's not often a lot of dissolved oxygen that can stay there. It usually bubbles up, and then, you know, if it can hit the surface of something, it escapes. But dissolved gases is generally they're in between the water molecules rather than in the structure of them. If that makes sense.
Right, but I'm thinking photosynthesis, not anything else. That's what's, because it's literally just photons scraping the water molecule that creates hydrogen and oxygen. And then there's the.
Okay, yeah, so that's different than the question about respiration, right? That's a different process, right? That doesn't, right? Photosynthesis does not require oxygen, right? It gives off oxygen with that. So it's the opposite side.
Okay, yeah, so, about the oxygen that is created during photosynthesis, is that oxygen not used during respiration? The respiration comes, the oxygen during respiration only comes from the atmosphere?
Oh, no, it could be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, oftentimes it is, but usually, because the quantity of, remember, respiration is always happening.
Correct.
And so the quantity of oxygen needed is generally more, unless you're way at the bottom of that graph where respiration rate's really low, than what's produced here. And so that can go in, but we still need from the air, right?
So it's both.
Both. Because the air is almost 21% oxygen compared to the 0.004% carbon, right? That many thousands times more every time stomata are open. There's enough for a long time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we're trying to wrap our heads around what we were talking about a second ago, where, so I think you said earlier that despite the fact that it makes O2 as a byproduct of photosynthesis, that's not enough O2 for the respiration processes. It supplements that with atmospheric O2.
Yes.
Comes in through the stomata. I just wanted to be clear, because I don't want to tell my friends something.
Yeah, so that oxygen, right, released here in the light reaction, as John just described, sunlight absorbed, splits water, and oxygen released. That can go right into respiration, and often does, but it's not enough to support all the respiration unless, I'm trying to get to unless you're down here, right, where it's very low. In which case, that might be enough. But anytime respiration rate's rising, then you also need atmospheric oxygen to supply it. Right? The same way that you need atmospheric CO2 and can't depend on the release from respiration. Just because the quantity required in either case is higher. Julian?
So it's kind of what I was asking before, so like if it's basically using more oxygen in respiration than it's putting out in photosynthesis, then why is it that plants are considered to recycle if you're giving them all this beneficial oxygen and they're using it a lot too? Like how does it balance out to where they're like actually enriching the atmosphere with oxygen?
Yeah, it's because primarily they're using atmospheric O2, and this is generally released. While the O2 from photosynthesis can be consumed here, because remember, they're happening in different spots, right? Not all cells are doing this. All cells are doing this. Only cells with chloroplasts are doing photosynthesis. And so it's not, oftentimes, the location doesn't make sense to be a continuous set of reactions, and this oxygen is released. And especially in environments where optimal temperature is regularly achieved. Like if you're in, oftentimes the tropics, we think about it as warm, and it's generally not too warm. Generally, right, temperatures there can stay in the 75 to 85 range a lot of the time. That means you're in this zone. So then photosynthesis is doing more, releasing more oxygen than respiration in that case. And we end up with, clouds and rainforest and that sense of, the lungs of the planet. But the other thing that is connected to that, right, is we talk about trees, especially as carbon sinks, right? They're going to handle some of this excess carbon pollution. And that, of course, is here. They need a lot of photosynthesis to build a lot of biomass, and so they need a lot of carbon dioxide to do it. We've got a lot of that added to the atmosphere, and so maybe they can be a little more efficient with some help from industrial processes. That's time. Otherwise, more questions, bring them Wednesday. Yeah, I really try to go through the homeworks, the presentations, and find what else needs answering here, and then move on to
Breaking it down.